The heading to the psalm says it's a psalm of David when he fled from his son Absalom. We talked about that a little bit in weeks gone by, but the heading says the psalm applies to the time when David fled from Absalom, but I would like to say that there is no specific reference to David's problem with Absalom. And again, it's a matter of the context is one of those things where the context is not important. It's important if you're Hebrew, you're reading these things in church, you're singing them, having stuff preached to you about it. But for us, we're trying to read it, understand how it applies to our life. And that's what I think we're looking at it here. The psalm is perfectly capable of standing on its own for application in many areas of our own lives. We need to assume that this psalm can influence the way we respond to our own situations. That's what I want for these lament psalms, is to understand how they apply to the situations we're in and how do we respond to God in the situations that we happen to find ourselves in. It's 3 outline points. 1 and 2 is surrounded by the enemy. 3 and 4 is a shield around me. And 5 through 8 is the realization of deliverance. Okay, verse 1 and 2, let me read those. O Lord, how many are my foes? How many rise up against me? David's got enemies everywhere. I mean, you get to wonder how he even sleeps at night. Many are saying of me, God will not deliver him. So, in Hebrew, there are several ways to refer to an enemy. One of them is one who hates me. The Hebrew is, which means one who hates me. That's not here. This one is one who oppresses me, which comes from narrowness or constriction. It's one. His enemies are ones who oppress him. The word many, he says, how many are my foes? Actually means has become many or multiplied. It's escalating. It's getting worse. It's not a static number of enemies. It's getting worse. In fact, he says down in verse 5, he says, verse 6, he says, he refers to them as tens of thousands. That's a lot of enemies. But when you're king, your nations that are your enemies, it's lots of people. And that's kind of what he's talking about. Verse 2 is interesting. He says of me, verse 2 back, he said, many are saying of me, God will not deliver him. Of me is translated from nephesh, which we talked about in chapter 25, verse 1, being soul, being what we became when we were created a living being. But this is not the soul which survives the body of death. This is what we talked about this already. This soul is our essential being, the deepest part of our core. One might say our heart, but it's deeper than our heart. The heart is figurative, but the deepest part of our being, the soul, is literal. This is what you are. Anyway, David's enemies are trying to do, what they're trying to do is shake him to his roots, trying to leave him vulnerable when they say God will not deliver him. What does that sound like? God's not going to deliver you. It's a taunt. They're taunting David. On this term of deliverance, you need to be listening to this. The term translated deliver here means to remove a constriction, providing room. You know, we've talked about him having this feeling of being hemmed in. It seemed like all the time. This is the kind of, when he says God will not deliver him, it's this deliverance of giving him room, not taking away that feeling of being hemmed in. So clearly what David's enemies want to do is kill his room. He's asking for deliverance to have room, to feel like he's got some elbow room, to not feel hemmed in. They're saying, we're going to take it. We want to take that away. We don't believe God can do that. Furthermore, to use God, Elohim, here instead of Yahweh may indicate that these enemies are not believers and may even be pagans. They're saying, your Elohim is not going to deliver you. That's the most powerful part of God. Elohim, all-powerful, omnipotent. He can't do that. So this is a taunt against David. In verse 3 and 4, but you are a shield around me, O Lord, my glorious one who lifts up my head. To the Lord I cry aloud, and he answers me from his holy hill. This is kind of an interesting thing. You are a shield around me. That word for shield is the little bitty handheld shield. There's not much protection. But it goes around him. Think of it as a whole bunch of little shields that completely surround him as his protection. David refers to God as his shield. Let's see, I think I jumped ahead. The word for shield is Megan, which is the smaller round handheld shield designed to protect the upper torso. You hold it right here when you're fighting, just to protect your upper body. I think he would have been looking for something a little more substantial than that. But notice it goes all the way around him. He is completely protected. The middle part of verse 3 calls him my glorious one who lifts up my head. He refers to God as his glory. We have reference to Christ as our righteousness, and God is his glory in that same way that David refers to God as his glory. This is a complete reference to, this last part is kind of interesting. It says, he said, my glory, talk about God as his glorious one who lifts up my head. David is king. He can lift up his own head. He's king. For anybody else to lift up his head shows weakness. But David says, you lift up my head. God lifts up my head. That's for a king to allow to say something like that is a sign of humility. He recognizes his weakness and need for God in God's presence. God is the one that raises his head. God lifts David's head, indicating the vulnerability of his dignity and honor. This is another way of saying this. David makes himself vulnerable by saying, God lifts up my head. To anybody else that would hear that, it would look like a sign of weakness, but it's a sign of strength. It's a sign of humility. That would show David's confidence in the true source of glory and dignity. And verse 4 says, let me read it again. It says, to the Lord I cry aloud, and he answers me from his holy hill. I cry aloud sounds like an immediate answer, looking for an immediate answer. This is an audible cry. He says, it's out loud. He is not just sitting there worrying to himself. He says, I cry aloud, out loud. We don't know the form of the answer. We just know it came. It says, the Lord says, go ahead. And he answers me from his holy hill. Where do you think the holy hill is? It's the Temple Mount, right there in the middle of Jerusalem. Most assuredly, the holy hill is the Temple Mount, where the temple sits. The temple is hallowed ground, and everything around it is hallowed ground, making the Temple Mount holy. So they call it the Holy Hill. All right, verse 5 through 8. Let me read, I guess I'll read all of it, 5 through 8. I lie down and sleep. I wake again because the Lord sustains me. I will not fear the tens of thousands drawn up against me on every side. Arise, O Lord, deliver me, O my God. For you have struck all my enemies on the jaw. You have broken the teeth of the wicked. That sounds pretty rough. From the Lord comes deliverance. May your blessing be on your people. Verse 5. I lie down and sleep. I wake again because the Lord sustains me. When I read this, I thought of Jesus sleeping in the boat in the storm. When all that was going on, what were the disciples doing? Freaking out. That's a good way to put it. You know, they wake up Jesus, didn't they? They woke him up. That was in Luke 8, by the way. Where's your faith? He says. David, with all of the turmoil, with his, whatever that word is, he sleeps, knowing the Lord is in control. It's called faith. Jesus said, where's your faith? David says, I'm sleeping because I have faith. Verse 6 says, I will not fear the tens of thousands drawn up against me on every side. David recognizes he is hemmed in. 10,000 may be a figurative, probably is a figurative number unless they took a census and they know exactly 10,000 people, but it's a figurative number and it really is a lot of people to be against you all at one time. And they're drawn against him, yet he does not. He does not fear. He could fear them, right? Or he could fear God is not going to act. But he says, I will not fear. So he's not wondering if God's going to act. He knows God's going to act. He may be wondering when, but he knows he's going to act. Then verse 7 starts, let me read 7 again. Arise, O Lord, deliver me, O my God. For you have struck all my enemies on the jaw. You have broken the teeth of the wicked. This is, it's not a command to the Lord, but it is an imperative. I think he just wants to make sure he's awake. I want you to make sure you're paying attention. This is interpreted, this is anticipation of God's coming action, and it appears to have an expectation of immediacy. The middle part of that verse, he envisions two actions. One is to, it's on the next page, he asks for deliverance, but he says, strike all my enemies on the jaw, for you have struck all my enemies on the jaw, and you have broken the teeth of the wicked. It's like they've already done it, like it's already been done. A slap in the face. The Hebrew for jaw can also be cheek. See, we have trouble with this, I think. I was talking with Richard about verses like this, where David is talking about God beating people down and, kill my enemies and all that stuff. First of all, it's pre-Christian, but it doesn't excuse anybody's having those kind of feelings. But a slap in the jaw or in the face could be the jaw can mean sleep, which would indicate public disgrace for his enemies. He said, I want you to give my enemies a public disgrace. And he says, breaking their teeth indicates disarmament and defeat. I want you to disarm them, and I want you to humiliate them. That's what he wants for them. Verse 8 says, from the Lord comes deliverance. May your blessing be on your people. Deliverance and blessing come only from Yahweh. There's that pesky spelling again, spelled like our English designate for Jehovah, but the Hebrew says Yahweh. Deliverance and blessing come only from Yahweh. This is the exact opposite of the enemy's taunt in verse 2. Let's go back to verse 2, see what it says. Verse 2 says, many are saying me, God will not deliver me. But David says, from the Lord comes deliverance. Regardless of the huge number of enemies surrounding and closing in, despite their arrogant rejection of the possibility of deliverance, David remains confident in the good intent of Yahweh to deliver and even bless the faithful. David expands his belief that God is the source and hope of blessing for those who are called his people.